Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. In a moment that would later be remembered as the quiet before an earth-shattering storm, Sharon Newman stood in Victor Newman's office at Newman Enterprises with a look on her face that immediately put him on edge, because Sharon did not come to him lightly and she certainly did not come without reason, and as Victor studied her expression, the tight jaw, the steady but haunted eyes, the way her hands trembled just slightly as she reached into her purse, he knew before she said a single word, that whatever she was about to reveal had the power to change everything, and Sharon confirmed that fear the second she said, "Victor, what I'm about to show you isn't speculation, it isn't rumor, and it isn't paranoia, it's proof." And with that she placed a slim flash drive on his desk, the kind that looks innocent until it detonates lives. And Victor scoffed at first because Victor Newman has lived long enough to distrust anything that comes too neatly packaged. But Sharon didn't flinch, didn't retreat, didn't soften the blow. Instead she leaned forward and warned him that Holden's secret wasn't just dangerous, it was lethal to the Newman legacy. And Victor's eyes darkened because Holden had always been a wild card. A man who smiled too easily and listened too closely. A man Victor had tolerated but never fully trusted. And Sharon revealed that her suspicions had begun weeks earlier when she noticed inconsistencies in Holden's movements, the way he appeared at the right place at the wrong time, the way conversations seemed to echo elsewhere before they were ever supposed to be heard, and Sharon, who has survived mind control, trauma, betrayal and manipulation, trusted her instincts enough to dig deeper, and what she found was a trail that led straight into a shadow operation designed to siphon Newman intelligence, manipulate stock movement, and destabilize Victor from the inside. And when Victor finally inserted the flash drive, and the screen lit up with surveillance, images, audio recordings, encrypted messages and transaction logs, the room seemed to shrink as the weight of realization pressed down on him, because Holden wasn't acting alone. He was feeding information to a silent partner whose name Sharon refused to say out loud at first, not because she feared Victor but because even speaking it felt like inviting chaos, and Victor demanded it anyway, his voice low and dangerous, and Sharon finally admitted that Holden's handler was connected to past enemies Victor believed were buried, alliances Victor had broken, and grudges that never truly die in Genoa City. And Victor's mind raced as he pieced together how recent setbacks, unexpected leaks, and internal sabotage suddenly made horrifying sense, because this wasn't coincidence, this was strategy. And Sharon warned him that Holden's endgame wasn't money, it was control, it was exposure. And it was humiliation, and worse still, there were timestamps proving Holden planned to move his final piece within days, possibly hours, meaning Victor didn't have the luxury of reacting. He had to strike first, and as Victor stood from his chair and paced like a caged predator, Sharon reminded him that revenge without precision would only give Holden the advantage, because Holden believed himself untouchable, protected by layers of misdirection and by Victor's own reluctance to trust Sharon fully. But Sharon made it clear she wasn't there for praise or forgiveness, she was there because innocent people would be destroyed if Victor underestimated what was coming, including Nikki, Claire, Adam and even Sharon's own family, and that warning hit Victor harder than any data ever could, because Nikki was always the line that could not be crossed, and Victor realized that Holden's secret wasn't just corporate espionage, it was a psychological assault meant to destabilize Victor by threatening everything he loved. And as Sharon revealed a final recording in which Holden explicitly referenced breaking Newman from the inside out, Victor's jaw clenched with rage that had been earned, controlled, and now unleashed, and he promised Sharon that Holden would regret ever believing Victor Newman could be cornered. But Sharon cautioned him again, insisting that Holden was expecting retaliation and had prepared contingencies, including scapegoats who would take the fall, and Victor immediately recognized the danger of collateral damage. Because Genoa City has a way of punishing the innocent when powerful men go to war, and Victor finally acknowledged something he rarely does, that Sharon had saved him from walking blind into a trap, and this acknowledgement didn't soften him, it sharpened him, because Victor Newman at his most dangerous is not loud, not impulsive but calm, deliberate and calculating, and Sharon felt a chill as she realized that Holden's greatest mistake was assuming Victor would act emotionally instead of strategically. And as Sharon left the office, with a final warning that Holden might already know she'd uncovered the truth, Victor made a single phone call that would set multiple dominoes falling across Genoa City, triggering investigations, secret surveillance, and silent moves that would ripple through every storyline connected to Holden. Because proof changes everything, secrets demand consequences, and Victor Newman never forgets a betrayal, especially when it comes disguised as loyalty. And as the sun set over Genoa City, Holden smiled somewhere else entirely, unaware that his secret was no longer his shield but his sentence, and Sharon, standing alone afterward, wondered whether she had just prevented disaster, or unleashed something far worse, because in Genoa City, truth is never just truth, it's a weapon, and tonight it had been placed directly into Victor Newman's hands. After Sharon walked out of Newman Enterprises with the uneasy certainty that she had just altered the balance of power in Genoa City, Victor Newman remained alone in his office, staring at the city skyline while the weight of what he had learned pressed down on him like a gathering storm, because proof does not merely inform a man like Victor. It provokes him, reshapes him, sharpens his instincts into something ruthless, and as he replayed Holden's recorded voice in his mind, calmly outlining plans to dismantle Newman Enterprises piece by calculated piece, Victor realized with chilling clarity that this was not a spur-of-the-moment betrayal but a long-term infiltration built on patience, charm, and access, the most dangerous combination of all, and Victor began mapping every recent conflict backward, recognizing patterns he had dismissed as coincidence. Adam's deals that mysteriously collapsed at the final hour, Nikki's charitable initiatives quietly undercut by anonymous leaks, Claire's sudden professional setbacks that made her question her own competence, and even Jack Abbott's uncanny ability to stay one step ahead in negotiations, all of it now pointing back to Holden as the unseen thread weaving chaos through Victor's empire. And Victor's anger simmered not explosively but coldly, because the worst betrayals are the ones that make you question your own judgment, and Victor does not forgive himself easily. And while Victor worked through contingency plans, Holden was elsewhere in Genoa City, seated comfortably in a dimly lit bar, unaware that Sharon had crossed the point of no return, but sensing nonetheless that the air had shifted, because men like Holden survive by instinct as much as strategy, and his instincts told him something had gone wrong, that someone had seen through the mask he wore so convincingly, and yet Holden reassured himself that Victor Newman trusted data, not intuition, and Sharon Newman, with her complicated history and emotional scars, would never be taken at face value without undeniable proof Holden believed he had successfully erased, not knowing Sharon had uncovered fragments he never anticipated could be reassembled. And while Holden ordered another drink, Victor quietly mobilized a response that would leave no fingerprints, calling in favors owed from past wars, reactivating surveillance channels he swore he'd never use again, and setting traps that would only spring if Holden moved exactly as Victor predicted, because Victor intended not merely to expose Holden but to let him destroy himself. And as night fell, the consequences of Sharon's warning began rippling outward, first reaching Nikki, who sensed something was wrong the moment Victor returned home with a silence that spoke louder than any confession, because Nikki knows Victor's moods as intimately as she knows her own, and when she pressed him for answers, Victor told her only that a threat had revealed itself and that she needed to be careful, which unsettled Nikki deeply because Victor does not issue vague warnings unless the danger is immediate, and Nikki wondered whether this was another enemy from the past resurfacing, or something closer to home, and Victor's refusal to say Holden's name only heightened her fear, while elsewhere Claire struggled with an unshakable feeling that she was being watched, that decisions she hadn't yet made were already being anticipated, and Claire's unease was no accident, because Victor had deliberately tightened the circle around those Holden had been observing most closely, and unbeknownst to Claire, Victor's security team had flagged her recent interactions, not because he suspected her of betrayal but because Holden had clearly been monitoring her trajectory, suggesting Claire was either a pawn or a target, and Victor would not allow either. And as Victor's plans took shape, Sharon faced her own reckoning, because revealing Holden's secret did not bring her peace, it brought anxiety, because Sharon understood the price of exposing powerful men, and she feared Holden would retaliate not directly but through emotional pressure points, perhaps by manipulating Noah, or weaponizing past trauma Sharon had fought hard to overcome, and Sharon questioned whether she should have gone further, whether she should have warned others, but she knew Victor would not tolerate interference now that the proof was in his hands, and Sharon could only hope she had done enough to prevent bloodshed, while Holden's handler, the unseen force behind his operation, sensed the shift even before Holden did, noticing that communication channels had gone quiet, assets had gone dark, and contingency funds were suddenly inaccessible, which meant someone at Newman Enterprises had moved faster and more decisively than expected, and this handler immediately demanded a face-to-face meeting with Holden, because exposure was the one variable they had underestimated, and when Holden finally received the summons, his confidence wavered for the first time, because secrecy thrives on distance, and face-to-face meetings mean damage control, and Holden began to realize that Sharon Newman's instincts were not something he should have dismissed so easily, and as Holden drove through Genoa City toward the rendezvous point, Victor executed the next phase of his plan by leaking false information through channels Holden had previously exploited, baiting him with data that appeared devastating to Newman Enterprises but was in fact carefully crafted misinformation, and Holden, believing his position still secure, passed that data along, unknowingly exposing himself as the conduit Victor had been waiting to confirm, and once Victor received confirmation that Holden had taken the bait, the final pieces fell into place, because proof is only powerful if it leads to consequence, and Victor intended consequences that would echo for years, and while Holden sat across from his handler, attempting to explain away the growing complications, Victor authorized a controlled exposure that would dismantle Holden publicly, while preserving Newman interests, allowing Victor to maintain moral high ground while ensuring Holden had nowhere to hide. And as whispers began circulating through Genoa City's elite circles about an impending scandal, Jack Abbott sensed trouble brewing, because Jack knows Victor's silences as well as Nikki does, and Jack suspected that an enemy neither of them had accounted for was about to be dragged into the light, and when Jack attempted to reach Holden for clarification, his calls went unanswered, confirming Jack's fear that he had unknowingly benefited from someone else's betrayal, and Jack braced himself for the fallout, knowing that Victor would not hesitate to confront anyone even tangentially connected to Holden's actions, and as the night deepened, Sharon received an anonymous message that chilled her blood, a simple sentence that read, "You should have stayed quiet," and Sharon knew immediately it was Holden, confirming her worst fear that he had realized she was responsible, and Sharon understood then that this was no longer just Victor's war, it was hers too, and she prepared herself for whatever retaliation might come, because in Genoa City, truth is dangerous, alliances are temporary, and survival often depends on who moves first, and as dawn approached, Victor stood once more in his office, reviewing the final report that confirmed Holden's operation was collapsing from the inside out, and yet Victor felt no satisfaction, only resolve, because wars like this never truly end, they only evolve, and Holden, finally realizing the full extent of his exposure, understood too late that his greatest mistake was underestimating Sharon Newman, because while Victor Newman may be the king of Genoa City, it was Sharon who had seen the truth first, and in doing so she had changed the game forever, setting the stage for betrayals yet to be revealed, alliances yet to fracture, and consequences that would reach far beyond Holden himself, proving once again that in the young and the restless, secrets never stay buried, they explode. As the consequences of Victor Newman's calculated counterstrike began to surface across Genoa City, the illusion of control Holden had clung to finally shattered, because the world he believed he understood was closing in from all sides, and every familiar face suddenly felt like a potential witness or executioner, and while Victor continued operating in silence, allowing others to panic while he remained 10 steps ahead, Holden felt the pressure mounting in ways he had never anticipated, particularly when his financial buffers began collapsing without explanation, offshore accounts frozen, shell corporations dissolving overnight, and long-standing contacts refusing to answer his calls, all unmistakable signs that someone with immense reach had declared war on him, and Holden, now fully aware that Sharon Newman was the catalyst, oscillated between rage and disbelief, because Sharon had always been easy to underestimate, her empathy mistaken for weakness, her emotional openness misread as instability, and Holden cursed himself for failing to recognize that survivors often see threats long before strategists do. And while Holden plotted retaliation, Victor shifted focus to damage containment, ensuring that those Holden had manipulated would not become casualties of exposure, and this brought Victor face to face with Jack Abbott, whose fury was matched only by his humiliation when Victor confronted him with evidence showing how Holden had subtly steered negotiations in Jack's favor, not to help him win but to provoke escalation between Abbott and Newman, and Jack bristled at the implication that he had been played, but the proof was irrefutable, forcing Jack into the uncomfortable realization that his rivalry with Victor had once again been weaponized by a third party, and although Jack despised owing Victor anything, he agreed to cooperate in dismantling the remaining tendrils of Holden's operation, if only to reclaim his own agency, and as this unlikely alliance formed behind closed doors, Nikki Newman became increasingly alarmed by the tightening web of secrecy around her, because Victor's warnings grew more urgent and less specific, prompting Nikki to question whether this unseen enemy intended to strike at the heart of their family. And Nikki's fear was not unfounded, because Holden, growing desperate, began considering actions that crossed lines even he once believed were untouchable, including manipulating public perception of Nikki through planted stories designed to weaken Victor emotionally before delivering a final blow. But Victor anticipated this, having already instructed his legal and media teams to intercept and neutralize any smear campaigns before they could surface, proving once again that Victor Newman does not merely react to threats, he dismantles them preemptively. And while Victor fortified his empire, Sharon faced an emotional siege of her own, as Holden's intimidation escalated from cryptic messages to deliberate psychological warfare. Resurfacing details from her past meant to destabilize her confidence, reminding her of moments she had nearly lost everything, hoping fear would succeed where charm had failed. But Sharon refused to retreat, leaning instead on the hard-earned strength forged through years of survival, and she confided in faith, not revealing specifics but acknowledging that danger had returned to their lives, and Faith's quiet resilience mirrored Sharon's own, reinforcing Sharon's resolve that she had done the right thing no matter the cost. And as Sharon braced herself, Adam Newman found himself pulled unexpectedly into the conflict when Victor tasked him with executing a crucial phase of the operation, testing Adam's loyalty and restraint simultaneously, because Victor understood that Adam's hunger for validation could either be a liability or a weapon, and Adam, sensing the magnitude of the threat, surprised Victor by acting with discipline rather than impulsiveness, uncovering a final data trail linking Holden to a secondary network designed to activate only if Holden was exposed, a contingency meant to burn everything down in retaliation. And Adam's discovery forced Victor to accelerate his timeline, because now it was no longer about exposure but prevention. And as Victor moved swiftly to shut down the secondary network, Holden realized he was running out of time, prompting him to attempt one last maneuver, confronting Sharon directly, believing that if he could intimidate or manipulate her into recanting, the foundation of Victor's case would weaken. And when Holden appeared unexpectedly at Crimson Lights, Sharon felt the room grow cold, recognizing immediately that this confrontation was inevitable, and Holden's calm demeanor barely concealed his desperation as he spoke in veiled threats, suggesting consequences not just for Sharon but for those she loved. And Sharon, drawing strength from the truth she now owned, refused to yield, calmly reminding Holden that secrets only protect those who control them, and Holden no longer did. And as witnesses sensed tension but not context, Holden retreated, realizing too late that intimidation only confirmed his guilt, and this misstep accelerated his downfall, because Victor's surveillance captured the encounter, further substantiating Sharon's claims. And as evidence mounted, the pressure forced Holden's handler to abandon him, cutting all ties in a ruthless act of self-preservation, leaving Holden isolated and exposed. And this abandonment marked the moment Holden truly understood the cost of betrayal, because the power structures he relied upon dissolved the instant he became a liability. And as authorities quietly closed in, Holden considered fleeing Genoa City, but Victor anticipated that too, sealing exit points through financial and legal channels that made escape impossible without triggering immediate exposure. And while Holden's world collapsed, Victor gathered his family, finally revealing enough of the truth to explain the heightened security and tension. And although Nikki was shaken by how close the danger had come, she stood firmly beside Victor, reaffirming that survival in Genoa City often requires vigilance rather than peace. And as dawn broke on what felt like a new era, Sharon received confirmation that Holden had been officially neutralized, his operation dismantled beyond repair. But the relief she expected never came, because Sharon understood something Victor did too, that removing one threat often reveals another. And the true cost of truth is never paid all at once. And as Genoa City slowly exhaled, unaware of how narrowly disaster had been avoided, Victor Newman stood at his office window once more, not celebrating victory but preparing for the next inevitable challenge, because power invites opposition, secrets invite exposure, and in the young and the restless, no war ever truly ends, it only waits for the next spark.